Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the Astronaut Capital AMA for February 2018. My name is Matthew Dibb, the CEO of Astronaut, and this was supposed to be live. Unfortunately, I've had a emergency, a flight to jump on later this afternoon, so I've had to do this quite quickly in a pre-recorded fashion. I didn't want to hold things up, but we will do let's call it a live spontaneous AMA next week, where you can throw as many questions at me as you want. But for now, I thought it would be a good idea to go through the 25 or so questions that we got through Reddit over the last 2 weeks, and I'll update you on the details a bit later on next week's AMA. So, welcome. You'll notice firstly that we do have a new logo that the guys did. Not sure what you think. Bit cleaner, a little bit different, no astronaut helmet, but let us know. Let us know if you like it. Cool. Okay, so let's move on. We got a bunch of questions, about 30 or so, which we have consolidated somewhat because there were a lot of duplicates. Some of them had been answered by other community members. Thank you very much for that. And so, we'll get through pretty much all of them through this session, which is great, without too many distractions and comments coming through. But as I said, we will have another session next week. I think via Facebook Live would probably be the best way to hold a Q&A. So we'll get on that. Without further ado, let's go through some of these questions, and hopefully I give you some very detailed answers on them. Okay. So the first one from It Would Be Grand. This was the most upvoted. So we're doing these in terms of the amount of points upvoted, and we'll do it in that sort of order, okay? So, first question. It's been a very turbulent autumn for crypto with enormous ups and downs and big shakes, that's definitely for sure. Astronaut had an amazing Q4 dividend. However, I expect Q1 to be substantially less exciting, and everybody makes money in a bull market, as you say. In a similar way, we've seen some of Astronaut's investments moon, only to fall back down again, BRD as an example. What is Astronaut's exit strategy for ICO investing? Seems to me selling at 3x or 4x is missing a big opportunity, even if you miss the bigger opportunity of a later 10x. So, does Astronaut determine when it's time to take profit for a particular token? Is this something that Astro token holders may eventually have a say in? It's a very good question. I think what we need to look at firstly is Astronaut is not a trading fund. We would never get into an investment for the purpose of making 3 to 4x. The way that we are and always have picked our exposure is we're looking for even 10x. We're looking for bigger than that most of the time. And if we were to take, for example, a word out of Warren Buffett's books, a very famous one at that, don't invest into anything today that you wouldn't be holding for 10 years. Now, it's not exactly the same for the crypto market, I get that, but you get the idea is that when we take exposure into something, we're not looking to necessarily materialize or I should say liquidate within 2 to 3 months or even for 2 to 3x. We're doing it because we believe that we could have a far bigger payout for it. Now, 3 to 4x always seems great, when something goes like BRD. From 90 cents, I think it went up to $3.50 when initially listed. And then right now, it's probably just above 90 cents again. The last time I checked, it was about 92 cents. So, for us, we we look at, and let's use BRD as an example because you've put it up there. So BRD, Bread, mobile app and wallet, they're using tokens for a number of reasons within their particular platform. Now, they haven't really implemented any of that as yet. It's all sort of still coming and rolling out, particularly to their consumer base, in which they have an established consumer base. So we want to wait until they've actually, I suppose, executed on their promises, in which case then we're going to see more of a substantial rise, because we invested in it for a fundamental reason, and that was it, rather than just price action. Okay, so we don't want to just invest in something because we think it's going to go up. Now, as a lot of you know, as soon as any token hits an exchange, you're generally seeing that 3, 4, 5x anyway. Now, you could basically just pick any token and hope that it hits Binance or something like that and liquidate. But we're not really in it for that. And I think that's probably the biggest difference. You said there, is this something that ASTRO token holders may eventually have a say in? I think it's a very fine line, and I say that because if we were to do our analysis and say, well, this is the reason that we're getting into it for 6 to 12 months, but a lot of token holders would like to liquidate all of a sudden, it sort of goes against the reason that we get into a lot of these. And so I suppose putting an entry into the hands of the analysts and then an exit into the hands of token holders, which is the wider community, can sort of distort the reason as to why we're actually investing in these. So for us, I understand your idea, but I think that it's a really difficult one to pursue having, they say, the old saying, having too many chefs in the kitchen, right? Where too many people are coming up with ideas saying, well, we should do this or we shouldn't do that. Ultimately, we are fundamentally bullish on everything that we get into, not for 3 to 4x, but for 20x or 30x. And that is the reason as to why. So I hope that sort of clears it up a little bit. As for your question, if it's something that Astronaut token holders may eventually have a say in, I'm not too sure. I don't believe that, based on our research, it would be appropriate. But we certainly understand where you're coming from in order to achieve, smaller capital gains. But the way that we see it, we're looking for much larger than that. And if something did change and all of a sudden fundamentals would say we should be getting out of this, then we certainly would. There's no doubt about that. So that's our position on that. But a really good question, particularly in this sort of volatility of the market as well, when we are seeing things go up 3x, then back down, 3x as well. Okay. So we'll move on to the next question. Question 2 from Crackpot Realism. Okay, question. You mentioned in a Telegram group a couple of weeks ago that you're in talks with another larger exchange. Can you update us on this? So we've got a number, and obviously exchanges we've been working on since, well, basically late November. And as we know, the market for exchanges it's become very different, I suppose, in the last 6 months. We've got bigger players out there like Binance. You've then got some of the US centralized exchanges like Poloniex and Bittrex that are actually delisting a lot of different tokens as well. So the centralized exchange sort of ecosystem, I suppose, has changed quite a bit. And for that reason, we have 3 candidates of centralized exchanges that we have been talking to since late December, early January, which we are very confident on. However, I can't name those. What I can talk about at the moment is some of the decentralized exchanges that we are working towards, and some of them require development as well. So we all know, obviously, about ED, Ether Delta, which, as everybody knows, is not the most, is not the best thing to be trading on at all. particularly given when it changed ownership. Now, Ether Delta has had problems with their API. So if you're looking at our coin market cap right now, you'll notice that some of the volume has actually ceased on it, which really sucks because it was drawing that from the API from Ether Delta. So they've been having a lot of issues, and so has a lot of other tokens on that. So that is something that we want to get away from very, very quickly. The next one that we're on currently is IDEX, which, as we know, it's a lot better in terms of user interface and stuff like that. It's still not the best, and there are others that we're getting onto or are on. Easy Trade, for example. I know that a lot of token holders have been buying off that, which has been great. But there's some that we are creating other relays for in order to get on their platform, and we're doing that as we speak, of which Radar and Bancor. So if you've used those, check them out. This has certainly become a huge priority for us. One of the reasons in which it is difficult to for ASTRO to get on some of these larger exchanges is obviously, number one, the fact that we do send out distributions every quarter, okay? But number two is also because a lot of the exchanges are looking for volume. Now we're talking about volume of trade or intraday trading, etc. And given the nature of our token, a lot of hodlers, I'll say, are holding on to it day to day, in which they wouldn't be selling due to the quarterly distributions that are coming out as well. So these are things that some of the exchanges are taking into account. And it's something that we need to, obviously on a decentralized exchange, it doesn't really matter. But for the centralized exchanges, it does. Now, the centralized exchanges that we're in talks with at the moment aren't the biggest. I'll say that right now. It's not Binance. They are mid-tier, but they are quite good and quite functional as well, and they do put through quite a bit of volume. So this is something that I can tell you is basically our number one priority right now in terms of commercializing our token further. Okay. So next question from JCR 921. Piccolo Research has only issued 3 definitive buy reports. Astronaut is only invested in one of these, which is Bread. Is there a reason Astronaut did not invest in the other 2, Chainlink and AirSwap, when they dropped below ICO price recently? Has Piccolo's outlook on those projects changed? It hasn't, no. I think that for us, they have been good opportunities, and we're talking even Chainlink and AirSwap was a little while back when we're just starting out. For example, I think Chainlink, or even before we're starting out, Chainlink dropped to below around 15 to 18 cents it went to. And then as well as AirSwap as well, which didn't perform at all for a while. We are still fundamentally bullish on those, and we didn't get into those simply because other opportunities came up at that point in time where we were looking to get in, I suppose, on the ground floor for ICOs, as opposed to getting straight into Chainlink and AirSwap that were underperforming at the time. In terms of our outlook on them, no, it hasn't changed. I mean, we're still extremely bullish on them. In fact, I mean, I think for a Chainlink, when we put out the initial recommendations on it, I believe we did sell quite a bunch on it when it did drop. We had a stop loss in there as well. So for those, we haven't had a re-entry on them. When they spiked quite a bit. In terms of high conviction buys, I suppose the rating for us in terms of high conviction has to do with more so, it's not really the time, I should say time frame in getting into it. So for example, it's not about whether the price will materialize to be a 10x within a certain time frame or anything like that. It's more so as to whether we see it as a strong fundamental outlook ongoing, not just right now. And even so, Chainlink and AirSwap are still up. We are still very bullish on them as well. I suppose the difference is that we have seen other altcoins that are already listed that we have chosen to put our Ether to instead of Chainlink and AirSwap. And that is simply because we've seen more opportunity in those others that seem to be more undervalued as well. So our position hasn't changed on those, although we did put in some risk management for initial Piccolo Research subscribers. Next one. Question 3, question 4. How do you deal with crypto asset custody? What measures are you taking to protect investor funds from fraud? Okay, this is a really good question, and I'm glad you asked, simply because it's unique to crypto, isn't it? If you're any other managed fund or asset manager, you've got bank accounts and insurance and stuff like that. So this is probably what we spent the most time on in terms of setting up Astronaut, it took a lot of time and a lot of stress and talking to different providers to be able to do this. Number one, we still hold a significant amount of ETH, Ether. And for that, we actually keep with AmbiSafe in their cold storage wallets as well. Now, that wallet, for example, is multi-sig 2FA. They hold all of that within a segregated wallet for us that's unique to Astronaut, and that's where a significant amount of our Ethereum is based. As for the rest of the Ethereum that we're actively trading with, we keep that and a lot of the tokens, in fact, in offline hardware wallets. Now, you all know about, for example, Trezor and Nano. So we use actually a variety of those. We've got about 8, I think it is, active wallet numbers that we use within these hardware devices. So those different wallets are across, those different wallets or addresses are across 4 different hardware wallets, in which case we back up the master keys for those in 4 different safety deposit boxes in different locations as well. So we've also got multi-signatures on that. So we've sort of gone to another level for security in terms of keeping the recovery passwords and phrases, if you like, in different locations, multi-sig, and we've got backup personnel plans for those in case something was to happen. So this was a huge one for us in terms of doing our due diligence in our setup, and we believe we've got the best way to do it. We haven't found any other ways that would be safer, I suppose. The last point there, you can see Gemini. That is something that has come out of the US. I think the Winklevoss guys started that up, but that's just for Bitcoin and Ethereum. So when you're actively focused on ICOs and altcoins, Gemini doesn't work to that extent. If you've got a huge BTC portfolio, then it does as a custodian or institutional for institutions. So for us, we're using what we believe is the best possible security protocol. The other point there is exchange risk. So we don't keep really much on exchanges at all, unless we know that we're going to actively trade it. So, as soon as, for example, we would do a Neo transaction or anything, we would put it straight into a hardware wallet, because we all know the trouble that a lot of the exchanges have gone through recently. And so there's a select few out there that seem really great, but you never know what can happen. And that, I think everybody has seen it too many times to, keep millions of dollars in an exchange and feel comfortable. We couldn't sleep at night doing that. So, the rate at which we transfer in and out of exchanges is very quick. So that for us is the best way, particularly dealing with a lot of ICOs and altcoins, is number one, cold storage. offline hardware wallets, and very little exchange risk. Okay? Cool. So question 5. Why don't we see more research from Piccolo? I like to invest my own ICOs while I'm also investing on autopilot. From Grandmaster Sam. Awesome name. So, good question. Piccolo research is integrated into Astronaut. So our research analysts are working for Astronaut first, and from that are also, I suppose, distributing that later to the general market and Piccolo subscribers. I think there's almost 30,000 now. So for us, we're actually doing all of the groundwork still. Nothing has really changed. I think that certainly what some of the feedback that we are getting is, guys, why aren't you putting out the research earlier so that we can get in? And I certainly understand where you're coming from, in that a lot of people want to see the research, before whitelist close, etc. But, something that I'll go on and talk about, a little bit later within this session is, I think more so about the timeframes. How timeframes have changed significantly, with regards to private sales and sometimes no public sales, etc. And also confidentiality as well. When you're contributing more substantial amounts as, more of an institutional investor, you are bound by confidentiality in some instances. In some instances, you're not, and they would prefer that you come out with it and tell everybody. But I think the difference is that white lists are getting filled up much faster. I mean, much faster. Even while private sales are still going and we're contributing, the white lists are almost closed because they're getting 50 to 100,000 people sign up. So it's not that we're producing less research. It's just that we're really only producing research at the moment on things that we're investing in and things that we can get into. Whereas if we were to do a research report on anything that comes up, let's say, for example, Gemini or something like that, any of those, for example, that had a 1 ETH cap, that's going to be quite useless for Astronaut and quite useless. I'm not going to say useless for everybody, but it wouldn't be a great way for us to utilize our time as a team in terms of doing extensive research on something that has such a small cap. And so we're very mindful of that now. As I said, Piccolo Research, the team, serves Astronaut first, and that's always been our priority. Okay? So, just on that, before I do go on, something that we are doing a little bit more of now is, even if we cannot get the research out, in a timely fashion, like for the last tranche that we did, we sent out an email and said, guys, this is what we're getting into now. These 4 or 5. Research has not been produced yet, but just to give you a heads up. So there is a bit of risk for you in doing that because you haven't seen the research, but you will know that Astronaut has taken exposure. So we will be trying to do that in a more timely manner as well, okay? Cool. So, question 6 from Electronic, I think. I posted this point already in another thread. Might be a good occasion to discuss it. The question is, why aren't the 1.5 million ASTRO tokens that the fund is holding to increase the FUM, funds under management, for those who don't know, not calculating the actual funds under management? Background of the question: if you calculate the funds under management against market value of the ASTRO token, there is a pretty big gap. I hope my math is correct. To make my point, I use numbers of the last report. The funds under management was 5.8 million in the report on the end of January. Since there are about 7 million ASTRO tokens per coin market cap, each token represents about 0.82 of the funds under management. That means that the price at the end of January is 440. Okay, but if you take into account that the fund holds another 1.5, that they're going to be. Yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying. That 1.5 is not circulating. It's not. It wouldn't be a true representation to include that 1.5 in the funds under management or the circulation of supply, because they're not. They're sitting there as reserve to be used in cold storage to be used for further capital raising quarter by quarter, which is another question I'll soon talk about. But what you're talking about is if we did add them, then the yield basically per price is going to be better, and therefore probably stimulate the price as well. The only problem is we could do that, but it doesn't give a true reflection of that. If we were to contribute it also to our funds under management, again, could it be done? Yes. At this stage, I think that 1.5 million, with the volatility that we're seeing in ASTRO due to liquidity as well, I think that we would find that funds under management would increase and decrease substantially day to day because of that. It wouldn't be yet a true representation. However, you do make a very good point as to, should we be adding it? We would certainly consider this at a time in which our liquidity issues with regards to exchanges are sorted out. I think that's one of the main things for us in that if you can justify liquidity, then you can justify price action. And right now, we wouldn't add that funds under management those ASTRO tokens, 1.5 million, into our funds under management just yet. But this is something that we'll certainly revisit. So it's a very good question that you've asked. This is something that would certainly revisit as we increase liquidity on those other exchanges as well. So thank you very much for the question. Okay, question 8. In this thread from 4 months ago, also requesting more information about the astronaut team, you mentioned profiles would be made available on the website. This doesn't seem to have happened. Besides yourself, who's actually in the astronaut team? We only have ever heard from Matt. Are you getting sick of hearing from me? From JC. Good question. I assure you I'm not Superman, so I'll show you some of the team. Just so you know, the website we've created in the interim, we've been busy. If you've been through the new Astronaut Capital website, we've been quite busy doing things like iOS and launching our Android. By the way, Android's coming out now. So we've lodged that with the Play Store, so everybody with an Android will soon be very happy about that. But our website doesn't have a lot of information on it, so I apologize for that. That is obviously after we get the web trader out, we will spend time on our landing page and website for everybody. But in answer to your question, no, this is not a one-man operation. I want to introduce you to the astronaut family. We have here the top line, which are effectively our research hub, and deal flow to some extent as well. However, we get a lot of our deal flow, which I'll talk about a little bit later, from others in different networks as well. But this is what I call a filtration and research team on the top line, us four, Scott, Mike, Simon. And then down the bottom, we've got to the left, Mr. Astle, who's our legal compliance and takes care of the custodianship relationships. John Myers, who helps quite a bit with the networking and advisory. Roman, who's our technical specialist, who looks at GitHub pretty much all day, trawling through different pieces of code. Mr. Dung is our iOS web trader and now Android. Thank you, Dung. Now Android developer. And he's got a couple of guys underneath him as well. And then we've got Becca, who assists us with a lot of the design and graphics and things like that. In addition to that, we've got a number of operational staff that help with the day-to-days. But more importantly, we try our best to keep this a tight-knit team. If we were like every other ICO, I suppose, that has $10 million to spare in operational costs, then we'd probably consider adding more, maybe. But for us, we have enough in terms of research capacity, which I'll be talking about soon as well, because somebody asked about, how it is that we actually filter through all of these ICOs. So I'll be talking about that a bit. But in terms of our capacity, we think we do pretty well. And you do hear from me a lot because I like to know what's happening within the community. And I always have, even throughout ICO period as well, and keeping my finger on the pulse. Whereas the other guys generally will have their head down in terms of research. I wish I could write research like them. Unfortunately, I can't. If you see my spelling, you would know. So yeah, that's the team, and we are continuing to hire from a more of a support and operational side. We have some junior research analysts starting that are going to help the other guys with, from a research perspective in terms of doing initial due diligence. So if you're interested in that, please, and around Singapore, please do apply. It would be great to get in touch. Let's move on. How is Astronaut Capital treating the 1.5 million ASTRO tokens to increase in funds under management in regards to dividends? Background of the question: when a dividend is paid out to all token holders, does the fund credit? No. So similar to the question, I think it was question 6, as to how is it that that 1.5 million is treated. It's actually excluded from dividends. So you'll remember that even in the last dividend in December, sorry, it's freezing in here. I mean, Singapore is 40 degrees, but in here it's cold. That is actually excluded completely. In the last dividend in December, we excluded that because it's in cold storage. We don't actually use that amount at all in terms of our calculations. So, how is it actually? Do we credit dividends to ourselves for that 1.5 million? No. It all goes out to what is circulating. So, this quarter we'll be releasing, which I'll talk about shortly, 187,000, I think it is, tokens, in which case that will be introduced into the circulating supply. So that's a little bit different, but, for the rest of the 1.5 million, no, it's just not included. When the fund is selling a part of the 1.5 million tokens to increase the FUM, is that increase in FUM part of the next dividend? Yeah, it is as a capital base. But we then need to take into account whether that is actually an increase in profit or not. So we wouldn't just pay out on that amount that we're selling to. It would have to be the net profit based on what that amount has generated as well. So it would effectively add that 187,000 to our starting amount that was as of 27th of December 2017. And that's how you'd come up with the calculation, okay? Question 10, JC. You mentioned in the last AMA that Astronaut was seeking licensing status in approximately 6 jurisdictions. To include the USA, can we get an update on this effort? Yes. So these are the 3 jurisdictions that we're getting closer to, and this is in order of how far along the process we are. The first one being MAS. In terms of regulated asset manager, so that's based in Singapore, is the MAS. So we've actually been working on that from day one. The expectation on that was 3 months from lodgement, which was about November. So we're getting extremely close, but we're not there yet. The other one is AFSL in Australia. That is somewhere that, particularly from where I'm from initially, that we are fast tracking. So we're excited to get that one going. And the last one, which has also been, of course, the hardest, as you would expect, would be US. But given the platforms that are also coming out to assist us with security tokenization and licensing there, we're expecting this to happen much sooner. But right now, unfortunately, I couldn't give you a time frame for the USA. We have applied the correct documentation for the process, but not given an actual time frame as yet. So I would love to update you on that one, because I do realize it's one of the biggest, but it's also, to be honest, the most complicated as well. Question 11. There have been a number of high-profile ICOs recently. Example, Medical Chain, Globotex. ASTRO has not taken any positions in these. How do you determine what ICO is or is not worth an investment out of many to choose from? That's a good question. That merges with another question that we've got, which is how do we filter through the ICOs? I will cover this one more extensively in the answer to another question. However, just to give you a quick idea right now, there's a number of things right now. Obviously, the dynamics of the market and contribution has changed quite a bit. This really comes down to a number of things with regards to our filtering system. Red flags could be the negotiation with regards to lockup periods, when they're going to list and materialize. It is a number of things. So I'm going to answer this question with another one, if you don't mind. Question 12, electric orange juice. Which sectors do you think will get disrupted by ICO projects over the next 12 months, and why? For instance, exchanges are being disrupted right now. Coinbase, HitBTC, Bitfinex are such a pain in the ass to deal with because of high fees and crashing, having a handover, sensitive KYC material, etc. Decentralized exchanges solve some of this by taking a radically different approach. AirSwap, Bancor, completely agree with you. Yeah. So these are not necessarily in order of what we want to focus on, but certainly these are the big four for us in the next 12 to 24 months. We just believe that this is where the money is going to flow. This is where the most excitement and innovation truly is. So the first one would be decentralized exchanges. The ecosystem is generating a lot of volume, a lot of interest, and that means that a lot of new players are coming on board, a lot of new investors. The market is growing substantially. Because of that, we all know, I mean, even the centralized exchanges like Binance sometimes have to close their KYC. The lines to get in are substantial. They can't really deal with it. So, you know, decentralized exchanges, I think, have previously had a bad rap because there hasn't been many options. You know, we look at Ether Delta, which by no means is the greatest platform, but it is certainly, it started and it worked, okay? And so we believe that a lot of the DEXs that have started, you know, sort of mid last year in 2017 to earlier are starting to gain traction. AirSwap, good example. Bancor, as you mentioned, great example as well. So those are the sorts of things that we believe are going to be much bigger than any centralized exchange come probably 12 months. Don't get me wrong, I think Binance and everything is purely used because there is no other option really in terms of DEXs, but that is slowly starting to change. Bancor is now picking up a lot of traffic. IDEX, you know, a lot of these will, and I believe AirSwap will as well, pick up a lot more traffic in terms of P2P transferring and for tokens. So that is one of the biggest for us, most certainly. We believe there's going to be a lot of growth there. The next one, security platforms as well. You know, we're at a stage in the cycle where people are wanting to tokenize everything, and that means fractional ownership. Because of that, I think that securities platforms, take for example Polymath, I think that they're going to do extremely well in the long run. And you know, as we get towards more regulation, this is an absolute necessity in terms of, you know, how the market grows and matures and adapts. So those securities platforms that are I suppose, abiding by regulation that is forthcoming will do extremely well, because that's where the volume is going to transfer to as well. So it's almost like you've got two different sides to this. You've got decentralized exchanges, which, obviously are basically free for all, which anybody can use and almost transact on anything. And then you've got securities platforms that are pro-regulation as well. And there's no perfect answer that both of them are going to do extremely well. It's just that one of them are teaming up with governments to do everything legally, and then decentralized exchanges are just complete peer-to-peer. So they're also going to do well as long as, user experience is great. Then got alternate blockchains, things like Icon, Icon, Kyber, etc. I think that they're all going to do extremely well. They're harder to come by. They don't come by, something special doesn't come by. There's not a Neo every day that you can look to take exposure to. Those are always things that we're looking out for. And then established businesses tokenizing as well. So, we believe that we're going to see most likely more mature companies. Telegram, I suppose, is a good example. However, we wouldn't look to touch that. But, we're seeing more established businesses now that are looking to tokenize, which is really, really interesting when you think about it. And that is a great thing. It actually means that the token market is certainly maturing, which is great. But the fact that why we like established businesses that are tokenizing is purely because they can already bring a substantial customer base. Okay, so they can already, implement a token from day one to whoever is using their platform. And so in terms of market adaptation, they're going to always be way ahead most of the time. So that's the other area that we're looking at. And that's very different to just being an established business and saying, hey, we need to put XYZ on the blockchain because we want to raise money for an ICO. That's very, very different. But we're talking about established businesses that actually have a purpose in terms of tokenization. So that's the other area that we're looking at, which I believe we're going to see a lot more of. Question 13. How does the process of choosing ICOs look like at Astronaut Capital? Could you please talk about the stages of ICO selection and researching how much effort does it take to move on ICO on the next stage? For example, each month you discover 200. Okay, so I get what you're saying. Let me take you through quickly the process of this. Hopefully you can see me, there's a bit of light in the background. Filtering, how to filter and execute. So the first thing is deal flow. As we know, a lot of the ICOs that are coming out now are being filled in private stages. So deal flow is a big one for us. Now we generally have, we used to have more of the deal flow, I suppose, internally. So a lot of the other guys would be ringing around into certain companies that were proposing to ICO that we would look at and research. That has changed. We are still doing that, but we've got a select few key people within different networks that are presenting that deal flow to us. So that gives it some validation in the first instance. At least we're going to look at it because of prior dealings with them. We then look at the structure of the token. So first thing is, what is the deal? How much are they looking to raise? How much is going to the crowd, etc. So the structure is the first thing without even looking at the business. We look at the structure, whether it is going to be a structure that would be interested in getting into, and whether it's actually viable for any investment whatsoever. And, they're not putting out 10% to the crowd and keeping 90% to themselves. And that sort of takes us on to the third point, which is red flags. Are there any red flags? And before we look for green lights, I suppose, or green flags, we're looking for red flags, because that's actually the quickest way to filter. Is not look for what's good about a particular ICO, but actually look for what's bad, because usually what's bad, if there are major red flags, there's no way that you would go near it, and they're actually much easier to find. So red flags is basically the third thing that we look at. So those first 3 points there can be done very quickly for a lot of deals, very quickly, and that will usually knock out, it could be upwards of 50-60% of them, to be honest. The fourth thing is we look at deal structure. So we'll look at, lock-ins and bonuses and stuff like that. There's some ICOs that are doing significant raisings that you'd be locked into for 1 year, 2 years. Now, it's not to say that we wouldn't hold them for 1 or 2 years, but we need to know that we have liquidity sooner than that, a lot sooner than that. So looking at the lock-ins and bonuses is a really big one for us as well. We then look at some of the institutional interests. Are there other players that have come in at an early stage? Who are they? Are they big hitters? Have they come in strategically? Are they coming in because of some sort of technical partnership, commercial partnership? We then look at the time to sale and deploy. If somebody is raising now and but they don't deploy, for example, they don't actually send out the tokens or seek to do a public sale for 6 months, then that is once again a liquidity issue for us as well. From that point in time, if all of those above are a green tick, then we do an in-depth review, and we look at go down to the core of the business and look as to whether it is commercially viable to the market, and whether it's viable for Astronaut as an investment as well. So that's a really big one in terms of that's where the most work is, actually, if they get to that stage of in-depth review. Once we do that, it's about negotiation, whether it's lock-up periods, bonuses, etc., and then obviously contribution. So the vast amount of time that is spent in terms of the whole filtering, execution, and analytical process, the first 4 or 5 points there are quite easy and can be done usually within about 1 to 2 days if they pass, all of those. It is then up to the other guys for the in-depth review, and that probably takes the longest if they get to that stage. So those final 3 points take some time. I hope that gives you a bit more of an idea. As to how many we look at a day, I think between the 4 other guys that are mainly looking at them, be looking at anywhere between 3 or 4 a day each. We're overlapping sometimes, so it's different at different stages, I suppose. It's just a matter of how many have red flags and how many can we actually get through diligently. Okay, question 14. Assuming no updates have been released on this topic in the interim, could you please discuss any plans to utilize the frozen pool of tokens? It's from Quid, New York City, including whether they'll be used to bootstrap trading on exchange. Good question. Other than ED, I like how you said that. Okay, so there is a frozen pool of tokens that we've got. It's about 1.5 million, in which we are able to release roughly 187,000 of them per quarter. We're looking to release them onto a new decentralized exchange. Now, I'm not going to say which yet, seeing as we're at the final stages of a process of some different decentralized exchanges. However, there will be a decision made on this at the end of February. So the real question is how they're going to be released and at what price, because we know that flooding the market with 187,000 could move the price quite a bit, right? There was a big sell order for that. So we can't give you a final answer yet because the guys are working on different formulas and methods to do this. We could, there's enough demand, obviously, institutionally that we could sell them all out, but we want to obviously give, number one, we want to give the opportunity for all of the Astro holders to do it first. Number two, it gives us a really good opportunity to get onto another decentralized exchange and really boost volume on there as well. So we're looking at different formulas. For example, a 90-day VWAP, which would give us average pricing based on volume of the Astro tokens, and would give us a formula as to what price we should be aiming for in terms of an average. It's important because we don't want to reduce price, but we don't want to increase price significantly because of liquidity. So this is where the guys are coming up with different models on this as to which way we're going to do it, how it is that we're going to sell it, and in what tranches we're going to sell it as well. So all in all, there's 187,000 that will be for sale. This will occur at the end of February and the start of March, okay? And it will be on a decentralized exchange. It gives us the opportunity to really put through some volume there. It's just a matter for us as to which one right now and as to how we're going to come up with that formula. So that will be completely another session that we can talk about. And as I said, it's very important that we structure this right, because it will be the process moving forward every single quarter. And so there's a lot of thought going into how to execute this. What it does, just so you know, the frozen pool gives basically Astronaut a capital injection of brand new Ethereum to go out and spend on ICOs. Okay, so we're able to do 187,000 Astros a quarter. Right now at $2 to $3. That gives us another $600,000 or so, $500,000 to $600,000 to put into other ICOs. So that's effectively what we're looking at doing. But there will be an update on that. Basically, it'll have to be next week, given that we're getting to the end of February already. So expect an announcement on that as well. Okay, question 15. It's getting harder for individuals to get into public sales of interesting ICOs. I was wondering, could ASTRO administer a community fund to enable community members getting in private sales? Astronaut would charge some administration fee and only act as a mediator. This would be a valuable addition to ASTRO app to allow members to vote for participating in nominated ICOs and to collect funds and distribute tokens after ICO. Any ASTRO holder could join on the voluntary basis, and it would definitely be valuable in the future. Okay, so we looked at this as effectively creating a pool, which is what you're suggesting, almost like a side pool, if you like. It's a very different model to what we are currently in, and I think that you're probably asking this because I think a lot of people are finding it very difficult to get into new ICOs. I realize that it is getting difficult, particularly at public sale stage. I mean, you've got a lot of companies that are actually stopping at private sale and just doing public sale. Stopping at private sale and just doing airdrops, which is really interesting, very different to 68 months ago. So I understand exactly what you're saying. There's a couple of things to take into consideration here, which is why we haven't done it yet. Okay. First one is minimum and maximum caps for ICOs. So at the moment, there are for a lot of private sales, we're getting dialed back as well as everybody else. For example, they might raise $5 million in private sale, but that will be between, let's say, 20 or 30 strategic or institutional investors or funds. So in fact, we can't actually contribute more. So a lot of the time, it's more so when you see, if we're very bullish about a new ICO, but we've only put in 50 to 100,000, it's because that's the maximum that we could do. It's also the maximum that everybody else could do as well. So that's one of the main things at the moment in terms of, creating a structure as to what you're talking about. You've then got, of course, the administration and KYC, because under a fund as Astronaut is very different. But then if you were to put the tokens into others' names as well, let's say we got 1,000 people from Astronaut to also contribute, then that's also going to create a lot of issues on the admin and KYC side as well. And for those that can't produce the KYC or in a country that they cannot, then that also creates issues. The other and third is bonus distributions. So bonus distributions are, for private sales, you're generally locked in for anywhere between 1 and 3, 4, 5, 6 months for the bonus distribution. So those tokens actually don't get sent to Astronaut or anybody else until almost like they're vested. So for that reason, that's where it can become extremely difficult 6 months later, sending more bonus tokens. So what you're asking is very interesting. Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze. What you're asking is very interesting, but it's for us, it's not viable yet. And I say that because where the market's changed a lot, and where it is now, and where it's going to be in 1 month or 2 months, it may no longer be relevant. We're seeing companies, as I said, most ICOs that are raising private sale only, and that's becoming more common. It could change within the next 3 months, and so the pooling of funds as almost a side fund, I think, would be very difficult to do right now. But this is something that we could reevaluate. But right now with what's going on, a lot of people or institutional funds are actually getting dialed back on allocations rather than being able to contribute more. So a really good question though, and it is something that has been asked previously. Question 16, how do you see Astronaut's primary focus changing over the next 3 years? From CDEX. Okay, so this is our focus over the coming years. Firstly, ground floor investment. We want to stay in basically as an investor or seeking investment opportunities that are ground floor, that are coming up to sale, that are looking for a liquidity event within the next 3 months or so, 6 months max, not much longer than that. And that means being in an early stage. So people have asked us, well, what about trading, high frequency trading, arbitrage, exchange arbitrage? And I got to tell you, we've looked at those opportunities before in terms of, is that a path that we would go down in the coming years? And I'd never rule anything like that out. But right now, for the foreseeable future, those aren't areas of investment that we would look at tackling. And I say that because it is a lot of work to set up, takes a lot of time, and the profitability is not there in comparison to what we're doing, which is getting in early stage and looking to support capital growth of a lot of these companies. And that is a major thing for us in terms of supporting them, not just investing in them, but being able to also talk about what they do, releasing research on them, so that we can also give exposure to some of these companies that we're investing in. And I think that is one of the very, very unique points about Astronaut. The research that the guys do up, I don't see another asset manager or anything, or a fund that is doing similar. And so being able to support the growth of these companies and exposure through due diligence is one of our unique points of Astronaut, and that's something that we want to continue to do, if not, even more so. So that's a big one, and I think the final point is also keeping up with regulation. I mentioned some of the licensing initiatives that we're doing before. We want to grow into a really, really big company. We want more investors. We want to be able to get into more opportunities. And to do that, we're going to have to side with regulation. We've always been pro-regulation as well, believe that it's healthy and it will create more volume. And so that's something that it's very hard, because obviously you've got licensing in jurisdictions everywhere. And so it's a very hard thing for even the polymaths of this world to do. But that is something that we agree with, and that's going to be also our focus over the coming years. Let's move on to the next stage. Could you please comment a bit on your approach to portfolio management and managing risk in the portfolio of liquid crypto assets? Granted that ASTRO is not a trading fund, but it is high exposure to volatile assets. For instance, to what extent is there willingness to move in and out of USD positions in a crypto market downturn? Okay, so I think that managing risk in these markets is extremely difficult for your average investor if you're not using things like USDT, which, as we know, USDT has had a lot written about it this year and a lot of negative press. There are a lot of concerns around it, and for that reason, we keep exposure pretty much non-existent to USDT at the moment, which is a shame because it was a very extremely liquid way to hedge risk. But that is obviously when you've got funds in there, a significant amount of funds, it's a problem with this sort of news flow. So that's something that we're staying away from. Now, how do you manage risk then? Good question. Stable coins is something that we've been focusing on a lot. I mean, you'll see that, the guys suggested that we get into quite a while ago, Maker. You've probably had a look at the DAI that they've created there. And more recently, you've got Haven as well that we also took a strategic position in ICO because we believe that stable coins are actually a big part of the future growth, and it's an absolute necessity for crypto markets. So those are substantial, I should say that's a substantial area that we're looking to get into in terms of managing risk, is like stability coins. So for us, outside of stable coins, we're also looking to get into more so hedging in terms of futures hedging. So one of the other opportunities is effectively, and we've just been approved for a futures license as well, for basically for Bitcoin futures contracts to actually sell into them as well. So if there is a need to hedge out our positions in the crypto markets completely, we're able to effectively short a Bitcoin futures contract, which I believe is 5 BTC per contract on the CME. And that allows us to hedge the portfolio, or in BTC terms, I should say. So that's something that we're starting only very recently as liquidity comes into that particular contract. The other thing is building positions into other more secure altcoins outside of stable coins as well. And for us, I think the big thing there is looking at placing, for example, Ethereum into other more uncorrelated altcoins. And it's very hard because correlations come and go, as you all know. But things that we see, for example, we put quite a large position on Neo because we could see that was becoming uncorrelated, and it had for quite some time, which worked to our advantage, particularly during the downturn. It was the only thing that was green. And things like Monero as well. So we're trying our best to also spread that risk so that we're not, purely susceptible to downturns within things like Ethereum or BTC, which we don't actually hold any of right now. So those are the core points of managing risk. But this is actually something, as I said, and we feel quite strongly about, is being able, for the whole market, not just us, to be able to manage risk. And hence why stability, avenues of stability, such as stablecoins, are extremely important, and something that we're getting into from the business side, from the ground up as well. And while we're on that, I think we did get the question quite a number of times as to what's the point of the ICO investing in Haven if Haven is going to be priced at $1 US. But for if you read through the report that the guys put out, Haven actually is creating two different coins. So one of them, just like Maker did for DAI, Haven is doing the same thing. There'll be Haven and Nomans. So have a look at that. That's why we're actually investing in the growth of their coin, not just hedging it to $1. That wouldn't mean much. Okay, next one. Question is, Astronaut has taken several medium-sized positions based on research. As an alternative approach which would make many smaller ICO investments that would also consider good fundamentals and hype, which would leverage on ASTRO's ability to get pre-sale discounts, then sell for a profit, rinse and repeat. This is, I suppose this is sort of similar to the initial question that we had as to why not get into things and out at 3x. We don't really want to waste time on doing that. Getting in pre-sale discounts, yeah, of course, that's a necessity for us. And sometimes, well, most of the time, the only way that we can get into something is basically pre-sale and private sale. However, getting into a bunch of ICOs for no reason and putting smaller amounts in them it's not really our strategy. We would prefer, instead of putting 50 ETH or 25 into every ICO that comes out without researching it, it's sort of a spray and pray approach, and would prefer not to do that. Would prefer to make quite strategic and well-researched deployment of capital, rather than just getting into anything because we can get a private sale discount. Now, don't get me wrong, what you're saying could possibly work, but it's not really the mandate of what we do. And, I feel that it would sort of dilute, it would take a lot of time away from the guys that are negotiating the deals. We've got two people that negotiate the deals and execute on them in the team. If they had to get into every single one and negotiate pre and private sales for very small amounts, I don't think it would be worth the time for Astronaut at all. So it's a great question, and I think that a lot of pools out there do exactly this. Some will do very well, but as this becomes a more mature and I suppose complicated market, I'm not sure if that particular strategy will work in the future. And then, of course, you've got the question of when do you liquidate. So thanks very much for the question. Okay, that appears to be it. Thank you very much for attending. Again, I do apologize this couldn't be live. We will be doing a spontaneous live AMA next week. Until then, I hope that I've answered most of the questions sufficiently, and I'd like to thank you very much for spending the time to put them out there in the community. I hope that you all find them very useful. We're excited about what's to come. There's no doubt about that. I think that with the market, particularly this first quarter, we've made a substantial amount of ICO investments. We believe that we're going to have a fantastic Q2. Q1, of course, has been extremely volatile. However, we're still looking to come out of it quite well. So we're excited about what's to come. And once again, I'd like to thank every one of our subscribers for being there with us, every one of our token holders for supporting us. Always interested to hear your feedback. You always see me on the Telegram channels. Love to obviously know what's going on in terms of our community and what people are thinking and what they're looking at. So again, thank you very much for attending today's AMA, and I look forward to providing more personalized chit chat, I suppose, next week on a live AMA. So thanks very much, and talk to you all soon.